Police slam black man's face into pavement for no reason. The headlights cut through the chilly autumn night like a pair of accusing eyes, harsh and unrelenting. Malik sat behind the steering wheel of his dusty, second-hand sedan, heart thumping louder than the raindrops that pelted the windshield. His hands gripped the rubbery surface of the steering wheel with such force that his knuckles nearly matched the white stripes lining the road. He was exhausted from a long day at the community center, where he volunteered helping at-risk youth learn basic computer skills and work on college applications. Now at almost midnight, with the roads empty and the sidewalks glistening under the flickering street lamps, he just wanted to go home, slide into bed, and let sleep wash over him. He breathed in deeply, rolling his stiff shoulders and reminding himself that soon he would be back in the safety of his one-bedroom apartment. A fleeting thought about the new series he'd planned to watch brought him a small measure of relief, an insignificant escape from a world that always seemed too eager to press him down. He wasn't looking for trouble, wasn't doing anything wrong, just another tired, overworked young man trying to make his way through a world that never felt entirely safe. Suddenly, in the mirror, red and blue lights erupted. The sirens wailed, splintering the quiet of the night. It felt as though an alarm had gone off inside his chest, too. His lungs seemed to freeze, and every muscle in his body tensed. Whenever the police lights appeared behind him, a sense of panic coiled in Malik's stomach, more reflex than conscious thought, a potent mixture of dread, anxiety, and a learned wariness that came from years of cautionary tales and personal experiences. He quickly glanced at his speedometer to confirm he wasn't speeding. It hovered a hair beneath the speed limit, exactly as he'd intended. He'd made sure his taillights were working. He'd come to complete stops at every stop sign. There was no clear reason for the police to be following him. He wondered, should I pull over right away or look for a well-lit area? His father had always warned him, if the lights go on, find a public, well-lit place. Don't make any sudden movements. Keep both hands visible. An image of his father teaching him these steps flashed through his mind. He remembered his father's careworn face, the lines etched deeper every time the topic of police encounters came up. Those lines reflected worry, heartbreak, and anger that such advice had to be passed down at all. Malik flicked on his turn signal, carefully slowing and turning onto a side street that led toward a small row of shops with bright security lights. He wanted everything to be clear. Let it never be said that he didn't cooperate, that he was hiding something, that he was in any way a threat. His heart hammered so insistently, he worried he might black out. At last, he eased the car to a stop beneath the fluorescent glow. He took one final deep breath and turned off the engine, leaving the key in the ignition. The sirens behind him cut off, but the swirling lights continued to dance across his mirror. He forced himself to remain still, to keep his hands on the wheel, remembering that each second could be a test he had to pass. Footsteps crunched on wet pavement. He couldn't see the officer yet, but the shape of the patrol car's headlights cast jagged shadows across the sidewalk. A single droplet of sweat slid down the side of Malik's face. He swallowed hard, trying to calm his breath, but the anxiety only tightened its grip around his throat. Then came the rap on the window, firm, inescapable. Malik pressed the button to lower the window a few inches, enough for conversation, but not so wide as to invite intimidation. Rain splattered through the opening. His eyes met the officer's, a tall, muscular man whose face was set in a stern expression that bordered on hostility. Malik didn't recognize him. It was a new face, new uniform, same tension he had felt many times before. License and registration, the officer barked. There was no greeting, no explanation, just that immediate demand. Malik forced a polite nod. Sure, officer, I'm going to reach into my back pocket for my wallet. He announced this with care, narrating his own actions like a tutorial on how to stay alive in a situation that should have been routine. My registration is in the glove compartment. The officer offered no affirmation, only hovered, features stony. Malik reached slowly into his back pocket, retrieving his wallet and placing it on his lap. With similar deliberate slowness, he opened the glove compartment, rummaging through the slip of legal documents. He handed over both the license and registration, doing his best to appear calm, cooperative. Yet the roiling in his gut felt akin to standing at the edge of a cliff in a storm. The officer scanned the documents, shining his flashlight directly into Malik's eyes and onto the seats, presumably looking for anything suspicious. Another officer appeared on the passenger side, peering in, shining a flashlight around. Malik recognized the second cop's stance, the way his hand hovered near his holster, the slight shift of weight, eyes darting around the interior. If Malik had been someone else, maybe they would have been less tense, less prepared for trouble. But his experiences told him exactly how precarious these few minutes could be. Malik, the first officer said, the syllables of Malik's name rolling out of his mouth in a way that sounded more like an accusation than an acknowledgement of identity. Do you know why we pulled you over? Malik's pulse raced. No, he genuinely had no idea. No, sir, he replied, keeping his voice as neutral as possible. I was within the speed limit, used signals, and— Step out of the car, the officer interrupted, so abrupt it was like a punch in the chest. There was no explanation, no preliminary conversation, just the bald command. Malik's mouth went dry. Is there a problem, officer? Did I? Step out of the car, the man repeated, each word clipped. His glare intensified. The second officer's flashlight beam swept across Malik's lap, searching, searching. Malik had no choice but to comply. He unbuckled, carefully pushing the door open, trying to think of what he might have done wrong. He ran through every possible scenario: broken taillight, expired registration, but he knew all was in order. He had double-checked everything earlier that week. There was simply no reason. Yet here he was, stepping out of the car with his hands raised slightly to show they were empty. The wind gusted, causing the rain to slap harder against them. The water soaked through Malik's thin jacket almost immediately. He was aware of the officer's imposing figure stepping uncomfortably close, close enough that Malik could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He wanted to ask for an explanation, but the words stayed locked behind his clenched teeth. The second officer moved behind him, and a chill raced through Malik that had nothing to do with the weather. Turn around, the first officer barked. Malik pivoted slowly, never dropping his hands. The second officer gave Malik a rough pat-down, rummaging through his pockets. Nothing, of course, except for Malik's phone and the few receipts in his jacket pocket. Then, without warning, that second officer shoved him forward, forcing him to sprawl over the trunk of his own car. Malik felt the cold metal slam into his abdomen. His teeth clenched, a reflexive spasm of shock and fear. This was no standard search. There was an anger in that push, a deliberate disregard, and it set off alarm bells in Malik's mind. What's going on? Malik dared to ask. But his question was answered not with words, but with an even harder shove against the trunk. The first officer yanked Malik's arm back, twisting it so abruptly that pain shot up to Malik's shoulder. Tears of agony sprang into his eyes. It felt as though his shoulder was about to pop out of its socket. The officer's breathing had turned harsh and aggressive. Are you resisting? The officer growled. It wasn't so much a question as it was an accusation, a premise waiting for Malik's inevitable condemnation. No, no, Malik croaked, desperately trying to keep his voice steady. But the officer's grip only tightened, nails biting into the muscle of Malik's arm, the tension 100-fold. This was exactly what he'd feared. Time slowed, the rain thrumming, the glow of the shimmering on wet pavement. Then with a swift yank, the officer dragged Malik away from the trunk, pivoting him like a rag doll. The world blurred as Malik felt his feet skid on the slick asphalt, unable to find purchase. The next thing he knew, a jarring explosion of pain shot through the right side of his face. The officer had slammed him down onto the soaked pavement so hard Malik's vision burst with white specks. His head bounced back from the concrete, leaving him dizzy. A metallic taste flooded his mouth, blood. His cheekbone felt as if a hammer had smashed into it. The scuffed asphalt tore at his face, the pressure so sudden and violent he couldn't even cry out at first. The second officer's boot came down, pressing between Malik's shoulder blades, pinning him. Every cell in Malik's body screamed in terror and disbelief. He heard the officer panting, felt the crunch of gravel under his cheek. Malik's world narrowed to the black, wet ground, the siren lights spinning across the puddles, and the suffocating weight on his back. He coughed, spitting blood onto the road. The next jolt came as one officer shoved a knee onto his lower back, while the other wrenched his arms behind him. Cold metal handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Rainwater trickled into the abrasions on his face, stinging like salt in an open wound. Malik tried to breathe, tried to form words, anything to make them see he was no threat. But the only sound that emerged was a strangled, panicked gasp. He could hear voices now, distant and muffled as though coming through water. It sounded like the officers were barking into their radios, a flurry of words: suspect, resisting, non-compliant. The realization that he had done nothing wrong hammered at his consciousness, fueling waves of disbelief. Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, mixing with the blood. He wanted to scream, "I didn't do anything," but his lungs refused to cooperate, pinned as he was under two adult men who easily outweighed him. A fleeting thought sliced through the haze of pain. Would they kill me here on this empty street? Over the howling wind and beating rain, the faint echo of voices emerged from somewhere further down the block. Malik wasn't sure if it was real or if his battered mind was conjuring illusions, but a sudden shift in the officer's attention hinted that they might have heard it too. Perhaps someone was approaching, maybe a bystander or even an ally. It could be the difference between life and death. As quickly as it began, it all felt surreal, like stepping out of his own body and watching the horror unfold from a distance. He had started the night simply driving home, hoping for a slice of peace, and now his face was pressed into rough concrete, sirens screaming above, strobing lights painting the scene in harsh neon. He had never felt so powerless. The first officer muttered something under his breath, and the second began hoisting Malik upright. A roar of pain flared as they yanked him by the cuffs, forcing him to his feet. Blood trickled from the cut near his eye, down his chin, staining the collar of his jacket. His left leg trembled so badly he feared it wouldn't hold his weight. Despite the agony and fear, he summoned the last shreds of composure he had. He raised his head, meeting their eyes, refusing to let them strip him of his dignity. Their expressions were unreadable behind the rain and the flickering lights, but hostility radiated off them like coiled wire. All he could do was stand there, battered, humiliated, hands cuffed behind his back, while the first officer gripped his shoulder painfully. Malik turned his gaze to the second officer as if asking a silent question, "Why?" The second officer averted his eyes, and that told Malik a great deal. Then, through the haze, he made out a figure across the street. His vision was blurred, but he saw a young woman stepping out from beneath a storefront awning, her eyes wide and horrified. She held up a phone, presumably filming. Another person emerged behind her. They too were recording. Malik's chest fluttered with a moment of hope. They had witnesses, people capturing the truth. But that same moment also brought a flicker of terror, knowing that sometimes video evidence changed nothing. Still, it was better than being entirely alone in the darkness, his word against an officer's. At least his story had a chance to be seen, to be heard. "Get back," one officer shouted at the woman, brandishing his flashlight, but the witness did not retreat. She stood there, soaked by the rain, phone trembling but determined. The second figure moved closer, switching their phone's camera angle to ensure they captured the entire scene. "Are you okay?" the woman asked Malik, voice shaking. She was close enough now that Malik could see fear in her eyes, and an undercurrent of fierce anger, too. He tried to respond, but his swollen lips made forming words difficult. The coppery taste of blood coated his tongue. He managed the faintest nod, though it was more a reflexive twitch than a real movement. The second officer barked, "Stand back or you'll be arrested too," but the bystanders stayed put, defiant. That small act of solidarity seeped into Malik's battered spirit. He was pinned in a nightmare, but at least someone was standing up for him. Someone was bearing witness. "Let him go," the woman cried, her voice steady even though her hands shook. "He hasn't done anything. I was right here when you pulled him over. He wasn't resisting you." "Ma'am, this is a police matter," the officer snapped, but the intimidation that had so easily crushed Malik's autonomy seemed less effective on these onlookers. The flash of a camera lit the scene further, capturing the moment in stark detail. Malik's body sagged. The officer jerked him upright again, almost as though to show who held the power here. They looked back at the bystanders, their eyes flicking from the phones to the people holding them. The moment felt electric with tension. A single word or misstep could cascade into tragedy. Finally, the first officer pressed a hand to his radio, speaking in terse sentences that Malik couldn't fully decode. Dispatch responses crackled in the night air. Malik's vision blurred again, either from the throbbing pain in his head or from the tears he fought to contain. The second officer rummaged in Malik's pockets once more, retrieving his phone. They scrolled or pressed random buttons, ignoring his feeble protests. Each beep of the phone felt like an invasion. But they found nothing incriminating because there was nothing to find. Just then, the distant sound of another siren drifted through the damp air. Another patrol car arriving, or maybe an ambulance, Malik couldn't tell. He tried to quell the rising panic. What if the next cop was worse, or what if they brought help for him? He couldn't read the officers' expressions. Their hostility never wavered, their faces still stone, but something in their body language shifted as they realized they were no longer operating in near secrecy. A small crowd was gathering on the sidewalk, likely some folks who had been drawn by the swirling lights and ruckus. Phones were out, people were watching. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. At last, after another stretch of excruciating seconds, the officer removed Malik's cuffs. A wave of pain washed over Malik the moment his shoulders were free. He staggered, and the second officer caught him by the collar, as though he might run. "Look," the first officer stated, voice laced with a forced calm. "We had a report of a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity." His words came across monotone and rehearsed, like he'd just invented them seconds ago. Malik's anger flared, but he bit down on it, too frightened of what might happen if he dared to protest out loud. "How is that suspicious activity?" One of the bystanders retorted. "All he was doing was driving. I've been standing here for the last 10 minutes. The officer ignored them, focusing on Malik. "We're letting you go with a warning." "A warning for what?" the woman demanded again. The officer shot her a glare but said nothing. Then, with a shared look and a nod, the two officers retreated to their cruiser, leaving Malik battered, bleeding, and shaking in the middle of the street. When the patrol car pulled away, its lights extinguished except for the red glow of taillights, Malik felt an indescribable mixture of rage and relief swirl inside him. It was over for now, but no apology came, no explanation. The brutality was inflicted with absolute impunity. The onlookers quickly converged on Malik, offering him help. The woman who first filmed the encounter introduced herself as Trisha, her voice still wavering with adrenaline. "Oh my God," she said, gently touching the side of his face. "We need to get you some medical attention. You're bleeding." She fumbled in her coat pocket and handed him a tissue, which he pressed to his swollen lip. Someone else, a middle-aged man in a hoodie, was shaking his head in disgust. "Saw the whole thing from my window," he muttered. "Unbelievable." He recorded a final clip on his phone, capturing the departing squad car as it turned the corner and vanished into the night. Malik, drenched by rain and disoriented from the pain in his head, tried to collect himself enough to speak. His voice came out raspy, his throat constricted. "Thank you," he managed, "for staying, for helping." He felt dizzy. He could taste blood on his tongue, and the left side of his face radiated a deep, pulsing ache. His arms trembled. Trisha looped an arm around him as though offering support. "We should call an ambulance," she said, eyes scanning his face with concern. Malik shook his head reflexively. He pictured a flood of medical bills, or the potential arrival of more police if they deemed him uncooperative. On the other hand, he could barely stand. I'll be okay," he forced out. "I just need to get home." Even as he said it, he wasn't sure if that was wise. Pain spiked behind his left eye, making the world tilt precariously. He hated feeling weak and helpless, but the adrenaline that had fueled him was ebbing, leaving behind raw vulnerability. The group shuffled carefully through the rain, guiding him to a nearby awning where he could at least find some relief from the downpour. A second onlooker insisted they call for medical help anyway, and in the end, Malik relented when he realized that the entire side of his face was swelling rapidly. The stinging cuts along his cheekbone might need stitches. More than that, he worried about a concussion from how hard he had hit the ground. An older woman with kind eyes and a patterned umbrella offered him a seat on a folding chair from inside her store. She introduced herself as, and she spoke with compassion, pressing a bottle of cold water into his hand. "You just relax for a moment, sweetheart," she insisted. "We'll sort everything else out." She looked furious on his behalf, her jaw tight as she scanned the street for any sign of the officers returning. "I've seen too many stories like this. Never thought I'd see it happen right outside my store." Malik felt tears welling, unbidden. He blinked them away, a swirl of shame and anger colliding in his chest. He recognized that the shame wasn't his to bear, but it weighed on him all the same. Strangers' kind, concerned faces encircled him, some offering medical advice, others discussing what they had witnessed. Phones were still rolling, capturing his injuries, capturing his disbelief. It was oddly comforting to see that they cared enough to stand in the cold rain rather than rush back inside to their own lives. Eventually, an ambulance arrived, its lights reflecting off the puddles like ghostly beacons. Paramedics stepped out, asked a few sharp questions, then helped him onto a gurney. Trisha promised to follow him to the hospital, telling him she had everything recorded if he wanted the footage. Malik just nodded, still too disoriented to fully process the cascade of events. Everything felt surreal. He had heard of these things happening, had watched shaky cell phone videos of them on social media, had read article after article, but it was different now. It had happened to him. Brutality had a name, and it was sealed onto his battered face. The emergency room was a study in controlled chaos. Malik sat on a narrow bed in one of the curtained spaces, fluorescent lights glaring down from overhead. Nurses came by periodically, checking vitals, asking for insurance, scribbling notes. His lip was numb from a local anesthetic. A series of x-rays were taken, revealing no fractures in his cheekbone, but the doctor suspected a minor concussion and insisted he rest. Stitches weren't necessary for his face, but they applied butterfly bandages to the deeper scrapes. While the doctor pressed antiseptic against his wounds, Malik winced, and tears threatened again. He wasn't merely reacting to the physical pain. The emotional toll was far heavier. He kept replaying the moment his face met the pavement, the officer's knee grinding him down. Had the bystanders not intervened, or if their phones hadn't been out, what else might have happened? The possibility chilled him as much as any winter wind. Once the doctor finished, Malik rested in a daze, hearing the beep of monitors and the distant hum of other patients behind curtains. Then Tricia stepped in, quietly announcing her presence with a gentle cough. She looked worried but determined, still holding that same phone in her hand. "Hey," she said softly, "I've spoken to a detective. They're sending an internal affairs officer to talk to you eventually, but I don't think you should rely on them alone. You have rights, you can file a complaint, you can contact a lawyer." Malik's gaze flicked to the phone in her grasp. She must have read his mind because she offered a sad, understanding smile. "I've already saved copies of the video," she said. "It shows them throwing you to the ground without provocation. You didn't do a thing." Emotion welled in Malik's throat. He managed a quiet "thank you." Something deep inside him uncoiled, a sense of relief. At least he had evidence. It wouldn't undo the harm, but it might hold these officers accountable. "Do you have anyone you can call?" Tricia asked gently. The question hung in the air. Malik considered calling his father, but the old man lived a few hours away, and telling him about this felt like it would add a fresh layer of heartbreak to their already strained world. He considered calling a friend or maybe a colleague from the community center, but in the swirl of the moment he felt paralyzed. Eventually he sighed. "I'll call my friend in the morning. He's a law student, might have some advice." It was a half-baked plan, but it was all he could muster at the moment. Tricia nodded, eyes full of concern. "Take your time. I'll stay as long as you need. I gave the staff my information and said I was with you. They might come ask me questions, since I was a witness." Malik tried to smile, but it just pulled on his swollen lip. He was grateful, more than he could say. In a world that had just proven how it could treat him, her kindness felt like a lifeline. The hours dragged on. In the early morning, a detective from the local precinct arrived. Detective Hamilton introduced himself stiffly, flashing a badge. He was a tall man with a slight stoop in his posture, and his face was a mask of forced neutrality. He asked Malik for a statement, systematically jotting down each detail, occasionally glancing at Tricia for corroboration. Hamilton explained that the officers involved would be under review, that there was significant concern. But Malik's gut told him that meant little. He'd heard that line before, too many times. Still, he gave a full account, describing how they pulled him over, how he, and the unnecessary brutality. Hamilton listened, though it was impossible to decipher whether he believed every word or was merely going through protocol. Once finished, Hamilton left a card with his number. "I'll be in touch," he said, his tone neither reassuring nor dismissive. And then he was gone, lost in the bustle of the hospital corridor. When Malik was finally discharged, the sky outside had shifted from the black of night to a pale, watery gray. Tricia walked him out, holding her umbrella aloft. The sunlight hadn't quite broken the horizon, but the rain had subsided, leaving behind puddles that reflected the streetlights and hospital signs. Malik's car was still parked miles away where the incident had happened. He dreaded seeing that place again so soon, but he knew it had to be done. "Let me drive you," Tricia offered gently. "My car's in the lot." He hesitated, but the idea of climbing into an or taxi alone felt daunting, and he was in no state to walk that distance. Finally, he nodded in appreciation. As they walked across the wet pavement, he felt an ache in his shoulders, a dull reminder of how violently he'd been yanked and slammed down. His face throbbed, each pulse echoing the memory of the brutal moment when bone met asphalt. The drive was quiet. The city was still in that transitional state between night and day, too early for rush hour, too late for the typical late-night crowds. The traffic lights cycled through green, yellow, red, mostly ignored by the empty streets. Trisha kept glancing over at Malik, as though checking to see if he might faint or collapse. He pressed a wadded tissue to his lip, suppressing any signs of further bleeding. When they arrived at the block where everything had happened, the memory of it all slammed into him like a wave. The puddles on the pavement glinted in the glow of the early morning light, but otherwise the area was silent, the shops shuttered, the sidewalks empty. Malik's car sat there, parked crookedly, a silent witness to the horror. He felt a chill as he approached it. "Do you have your keys?" Trisha asked gently. He nodded, tapping his pocket with his good hand. Everything ached, but physically retrieving keys was manageable. Once inside the car, he sat in the driver's seat, exhaling shakily. The interior felt foreign now, like a crime scene rather than a normal vehicle. He half expected to see shattered glass or bloodstains, but the only remnants were the water droplets on the seats from when he'd opened the door. "Thank you again, Trisha," he said, voice hushed. He met her eyes one final time. "I'll be okay, I need a moment." She nodded, stepping back but not leaving entirely. "I'll wait in my car until you drive off," she promised, "just to make sure everything's all right." Malik appreciated that. He sat there, letting the car idle for a few moments. His mind played back the memory of the officer's knee on his back, the cold, wet pavement, the shock of being slammed down. It was overwhelming. He gripped the steering wheel, taking slow, deliberate breaths until he felt a semblance of composure return. Finally, he shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, giving a small wave of thanks to Trisha in his mirror. Home was a modest one-bedroom apartment located on the second floor of an aging complex. Paint peeled on the exterior walls, and the security gate squeaked whenever someone entered. But it was Malik's sanctuary, a space he paid for with the modest salary he earned as a program coordinator at the community center. As he parked in his usual spot, a wave of relief washed over him. The sun was itching above the horizon now, painting the sky in a subdued palette of pink and gray, but Malik felt no joy in the morning light. He was simply desperate to collapse into bed. Climbing the stairs proved harder than usual. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his hips and back. When he reached the landing, he heard an early riser's TV murmuring through a door. He fumbled with his keys, pushing open his own door with a shudder of exhaustion. Once inside, he locked the door behind him and turned the deadbolt. The familiarity of his living room, the small couch, the chipped coffee table, the posters of bands he liked, provided a fleeting sense of comfort. But the reflection staring back at him from the dark screen of the TV was sobering. He turned on a lamp, and the soft glow revealed the swelling on his face more clearly. Dried blood flaked around the edges of his mouth. His eyes looked puffy, as though he'd been crying for hours. Sinking onto the couch, he let out a trembling sigh. He wanted to shower, to wash off the grime and memory of that night, but his body felt too battered to stand. So he sat, cradling his head in his hands, ignoring the dried blood that smeared onto his palms. Scenes flashed through his mind like a broken reel of film. The violent takedown, the mocking tone of the officers, the fearful, determined face of Trisha with her phone camera. He felt anger churn in him, fierce and potent. That question returned: why did this happen to me? He needed rest, but first, he needed to reach out to someone he trusted. Fishing his phone from his pocket, he grimaced at the smudges of blood and the battered case. He clicked it on, a flurry of missed calls and texts from unknown numbers. Some might be from the hospital or from the detective. Then a message from Trisha, just making sure you got home okay. Remember, I have the video. I'll wait until you're ready to proceed with next steps. He typed a brief reply, thanking her again, and then opened his contact list. His number stared back at him. Was a close friend from college, now in his second year at law school. If anyone could offer guidance or at least a listening ear, it was him. With a deep breath, Malik pressed the call button. A groggy voice answered on the fourth ring. "Hello," sounded half asleep, which made sense given it was barely 6 in the morning. Malik began, voice quavering. "Hey man, words failed him. How could he summarize the horror of the past several hours? "What's wrong?" asked, alertness creeping into his tone. "You sound off, did something happen?" Malik swallowed hard. "Yeah, something happened with the police." He faltered, tears threatening to break his composure again. "They roughed me up, man. I need some legal advice, or at least to know what to do next. There's a video. I'm okay, but they messed me up." Malik cursed under his breath, the shock evident in his voice. Malik, are you safe now? Are you hurt? I'm at home, my face is a mess, but the hospital released me, said I should rest. I'll probably need an official medical document for any complaint. Damn, murmured, I'm coming over. Give me an hour to get myself together. I can call a friend at a law firm downtown. Are you sure you're safe? Malik glanced around his empty apartment, half expecting the door to bust open. It was an irrational thought, but the night had rattled him so deeply, logic felt flimsy. I think so. The cops that attacked me left. They said they thought my car matched some suspicious activity or something. I honestly don't know. Let's talk when you get here. All right, I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there, okay? We'll figure this out together. When the call ended, Malik nearly collapsed into sobs, but a strange numbness set in. He felt as though he had no tears left, or maybe his body was just trying to protect him from more emotional trauma. His phone buzzed again, Trisha, likely checking in. He made a mental note to respond later. Right now, all he wanted was to lie down in his bed, if only for a minute. He climbed to his feet. Each step down the short hallway to the bedroom was laborious. The duvet on his bed looked so inviting that he almost collapsed onto it fully clothed, but the grime of the night was too much. Summoning willpower, he moved to the bathroom. Avoiding his reflection in the mirror, he turned on the shower. Steam rose, swirling in the small space. The water pounded against the tiles, a harsh but necessary cascade. He undressed carefully, wincing as he discovered fresh bruises blossoming along his ribs and shoulders. His reflection in the mirror was a harsh sight, half his face red and swollen, dried blood cracking around a small cut near his eyebrow. He swallowed hard and stepped into the shower. Hot water cascaded over him, stinging every cut, intensifying every bruise. He let the droplets merge with tears that finally found release. Washing away the remnants of the night felt symbolic, like he was rinsing off the humiliation, the fear, the anger. But the memory stayed embedded under his skin, a trauma that water alone could never cleanse. After he toweled off, he gingerly dressed in loose sweatpants and a t-shirt, wincing every time fabric brushed against his sore skin. Then he sank onto the bed, exhaustion overwhelming him. He wasn't sure how many minutes passed before he drifted into a restless doze, haunted by disjointed images of flashing sirens and shouting voices. He awoke to a pounding on his front door. His entire body jerked in alarm, heart racing, as if expecting a fresh onslaught. It took him a moment to remember was coming. He rushed to the door, ignoring the bolts of pain that shot through his muscles, stood on the threshold, wearing sneakers, sweatpants, and a hastily thrown-on hoodie. His eyes widened in shock when he saw Malik's face. Holy Malik, man, you look. Like hell I know, Malik finished, stepping aside so could enter. They embraced gently, mindful of Malik's injuries. His voice shook with anger and concern. I can't believe this. I mean I can, but damn it. He exhaled, running a hand over his short-cropped hair. Tell me everything. Did you get the officer's badge number or name? Malik guided to the couch. He described the entire ordeal, from the moment the sirens flashed to the moment the officers drove away. He recounted how he was yanked from his car, pinned, and slammed onto the pavement. His voice shook at times, and each retelling brought the terror back in waves. Listened intently, face set in a grim line, occasionally swearing under his breath. When Malik finished, let out a long breath. All right, he said, there's a process, though it doesn't always do much. First, we file a formal complaint. We have video evidence, which is huge. We also have multiple witnesses. That's more than many people get. You should also consider a civil lawsuit for excessive force. Officers can't do that, especially with absolutely no provocation. Malik nodded, though the prospect of a legal battle felt daunting. Where do we start? I'll call my friend Jasmine. She's clerking for a civil rights attorney. They take cases like this. In the meantime, keep records of everything, medical bills, doctor's notes, any contact with the police department. We'll need it all. And we should get copies of that video as soon as possible. I'm guessing your friend Trisha, is it? He paused, waiting for confirmation. Malik nodded. Yeah, we should get the raw files from her. Don't rely solely on whatever she posted on social media. We need an unedited version, in case they try to say it was doctored. Malik's stomach twisted at the thought of going through the bureaucracy, of having to relive the trauma in depositions, maybe even in court. But the alternative, doing nothing, seemed worse. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had faced such brutality and never received justice. Must have read Malik's expression because he leaned forward, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. I get it, man, it's scary, it's exhausting, but this is what they bank on, people being too scared or overwhelmed to push back. We have a chance to hold them accountable. Despite the pain, Malik managed a small, determined nod. Yeah, let's do it. Over the next few days, Malik's apartment became a hub of activity. He spoke with Jasmine, the law clerk, who requested that he email her a detailed account of the incident. He had to describe it all again, each time feeling the same twisting ache in his gut. Trisha brought him copies of her video, along with statements from several other witnesses who had also recorded. A local journalist even reached out after seeing the footage circulate online. The story was gaining traction, largely because of the shocking images and the raw brutality captured on camera. Malik's battered face, pressed into the pavement, had become a symbol of a broader issue. Friends and colleagues from the community center stopped by to offer support. Some brought meals or groceries. Mr. Bernard, the center's director, insisted that Malik take as much time off as he needed. He also mentioned that the board of the center would stand behind him if he pursued legal action. Malik felt both gratitude and discomfort at the attention. He had always been fiercely independent, more accustomed to being the caretaker than the recipient of care. But now, with bruises that throbbed when he moved too quickly and a psyche still on edge, he had to lean on people more than ever before. Came by daily, bringing updates on the legal front. Jasmine was arranging a meeting with her boss, a well-known civil rights attorney named Daniel, who had handled police misconduct cases in the past. The plan was to file a lawsuit not just against the specific officers involved, but possibly against the city if they could prove a pattern of excessive force or inadequate training. The entire notion made Malik's head spin, but he clung to the idea that justice might be possible. Meanwhile, the police department had launched an internal investigation. Detective Hamilton had called Malik twice, each time asking more questions. Malik sensed the detective was trying to suss out the angles, perhaps hoping Malik would slip up, but Malik stuck to the truth. He was pulled over for no reason, forcibly removed from his car, assaulted, and released without charges. He repeated it like a mantra, unwavering. Several nights later, Malik found himself unable to sleep. His cheek still bore a bruise that had turned a sickly yellow around the edges. Every time he shifted in bed, it reminded him of the assault. Around 3 in the morning, tired of tossing and turning, he got up to pace around the living room. The city lights twinkled outside his window, and he thought about the countless others who might be awake, grappling with their own fears. An idea formed in his head, a furious, determined thought. He wanted to speak out. He wanted to do something more than just press charges. He wanted to ensure this story was heard on his own terms. The following afternoon, he texted Trisha. She had some connections with local activists and had mentioned that a few had contacted her, wanting to support. Within hours, she had set up a meeting at the community center with a couple of community organizers who worked on police accountability issues. Malik arrived at the center with his hood pulled up, hoping not to run into too many people who would gape at his injuries. He was greeted by Trisha and a woman named, whose eyes lit with both warmth and a fierce sense of purpose. "Glad you're interested in speaking," said, shaking Malik's hand gently. "We want to help you amplify your story, maybe organize a rally or a press conference. People need to see firsthand what happened." Malik took a moment to gather his thoughts, the memory of being pinned to the ground replaying in his mind. "I appreciate that," he said softly. I don't want it to turn into some media circus. I want justice, and I want to help prevent this from happening again." Nodded, her expression sympathetic. "We can control the message to some degree, but once the media latches on, it's out there. The important thing is that your voice is heard, in your own words. We can also connect you with folks who experienced similar issues. We stand stronger when we stand together." Those words resonated. Malik felt an unexpected wellspring of resolve. Yes, he was afraid, still plagued by nightmares of that night. But he also felt the beginnings of a new fire in his chest, fueled by righteous anger and the unyielding desire to protect others from the same fate. They settled on a plan. A small press conference outside the community center the following week, with attorneys present, along with other individuals who had gone through or lost loved ones to police brutality. They would speak on camera, present the videos, and demand accountability. Malik was nervous about stepping in front of reporters, terrified that the officers or their supporters would retaliate. But the alternative, staying silent, felt like a betrayal to himself and others. Over the next several days, the swirl of planning consumed him, and her team coordinated permits, set up a platform and sound system. And Jasmine worked on the legal front, ensuring that everything said at the press conference would align with their lawsuit. Mr. Bernard offered the community center's full support. They even reached out to some local politicians who had expressed concern about police overreach. A few were interested in attending, at least for the media exposure. Malik tried not to be cynical about their motives. If it helped get attention on the cause, so be it. The morning of the press conference dawned sunny and unseasonably warm, an odd contrast to the gloom that hovered in Malik's heart. He arrived at the community center to find a podium set up on the front lawn, a small cluster of reporters adjusting their cameras, and a growing group of supporters holding signs. Some read justice for Malik, others displayed broader messages: end police brutality, stop racial profiling, and accountability now. Malik stood on the periphery, inhaling deeply, trying to calm the jitters that coursed through his body. He still felt the echoes of that violent night in his muscles, and each time he closed his eyes, he saw the glaring headlights, the swirling red and blue lights, the rough hand that pushed him down. Trisha appeared by his side, gently touching his elbow. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady. He found strength in her presence, reminded of how she had saved his life that night simply by recording the truth. "Yeah," he said. It was a half-lie, but he had come too far to back down. Introduced him to the small crowd. Her voice carried through the portable speaker, inviting the gathered reporters to listen to the story of a young man brutalized by those sworn to protect him. Cameras clicked, rolling, and microphones were thrust forward. Malik walked up, swallowing the lump in his throat. He began in a soft voice, but it grew stronger as he spoke. He described how he had been driving home, pulled over for no reason, violently dragged out of the car, and slammed onto the pavement. He explained the toll it had taken, his injuries, his nightmares, his sense of safety shattered. He gestured toward Trisha, praising her courage in filming the encounter, and the other bystanders who had come to his aid. Then, with trembling hands, he held up a still photo captured from the video. His own face pinned against the ground, rain-slick asphalt reflecting the officer's glare. The image elicited murmurs from the crowd. It was raw, shocking. Nearby, and Jasmine stood with Daniel, the civil rights attorney, who formally announced their intent to sue the officers and the city for violations of Malik's civil rights. Cameras flashed in quick succession. Questions erupted from reporters, some predictable, some probing. "Do you think this was racially motivated?" one asked. Malik braced himself, glancing at the bruise still visible on his jawline. "I don't see how it wasn't," he answered, voice taut. "I did nothing wrong, yet I was treated like a violent criminal from the moment they approached me." Stepped in, adding stats about how often young black men in the city were stopped for minor or non-existent infractions. The crowd stirred, some people clapped in solidarity, others watched with stony faces, perhaps suspicious or simply absorbing the gravity. As the press conference wrapped up, Malik felt an odd mixture of relief and vulnerability. He had laid his trauma bare in front of strangers, invoked the darkest moment of his life for public scrutiny. But if that was what it took to seek justice, he would endure it. Over the following days, local news stations picked up the story, playing snippets of the cell phone video. Hashtags spread on social media, calling for accountability. Some people reached out with messages of support. Others, predictably, hurled hateful comments or questioned his story altogether. Malik tried to avoid reading the vitriol, focusing on the positives. But it was difficult not to be affected by strangers insinuating he must have done something to deserve it. Around this time, the police department released a terse statement acknowledging the ongoing investigation and asking the public not to jump to conclusions. They described the officers as having responded to a potential match to a suspect description, though they offered no further evidence to support it. They also stated that the officers involved had been placed on administrative leave. It was standard procedure, but still a small glimmer of hope for Malik. At least they weren't still out on the streets doing this to someone else. Meanwhile, Daniel moved swiftly. He filed the official lawsuit on Malik's behalf, naming the officers, newly identified in the documents as Officers Murphy and Shaw, and the city. The complaint cited unconstitutional use of excessive force, racially motivated targeting, and violation of due process. Malik nearly trembled when he saw the official language, his name attached in black and white. He felt small, one person fighting a system that had centuries of entrenched power, but he also felt a surge of courage. He wasn't alone. Despite the swirl of legal procedures and media attention, Malik still had to live his life. He returned to work at the community center, albeit part-time, to ease himself back into a routine. The kids in his after-school program were worried about him. Some older teens who were fully aware of the situation expressed anger on his behalf. One day, a 16-year-old named Jordan confided, "I'm scared every time I see the cops. I mean, if they can do that to you." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Malik knelt down to Jordan's eye level, ignoring the pull on his still-healing bruises. "Look, you have every right to be scared," he said softly. "I'm still scared too, but we have to keep fighting. We have to document, speak out. It's the only way things change." Jordan nodded, tears in his eyes. It was a painful reminder that the weight of fear was not confined to one generation. Days turned into weeks. The city's official investigation began releasing small details. The body cameras worn by officers Murphy and Shaw had allegedly been malfunctioning. This set off a fresh wave of outrage, especially since multiple civilian videos showed them acting with clear aggression. Public pressure mounted. City council members began calling for transparency. Some activists hinted at launching protests if the department tried to bury the case. Malik started noticing a police cruiser parked more frequently near his apartment building. At first, he thought it was just paranoia, but then he realized it was often the same car, with the same silhouette of an officer inside. Was he being watched, or was it just a coincidence? Each time he left his apartment, he felt a coil of anxiety in his gut, worried that it might be the same men who assaulted him. One afternoon, after spotting the cruiser, he called in a panic. "Hey, calm down," soothed over the phone. "I know it's scary, but they might just be trying to intimidate you. You're doing the right thing by telling me. Document it, note the time, maybe snap a photo if you can do it safely. We'll let know." Malik did just that, discreetly taking pictures of the cruiser's license plate. Whether or not it meant anything, he felt a surge of defiance. He refused to be silent, to let them bully him into dropping the lawsuit. Then, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the officers, Shaw, apparently had a disciplinary history. A local reporter unearthed internal documents showing multiple complaints lodged against him for rough treatment of suspects. While none had led to serious punishment before, the pattern alone was telling. The reporter confronted the department's spokesperson at a public briefing, asking why Shaw was still patrolling. The spokesperson stumbled through a non-answer about ongoing investigations. The scandal grew, shining an even brighter spotlight on Malik's case. And Jasmine, together with Daniel, filed motions requesting any and all internal documents related to the officers. They prepared to depose them under oath, forcing them to explain why they used such force on Malik. The city's legal team tried to stall, but public sentiment was no longer in their favor. The video footage was undeniable. Even the police union representative sounded cautious, no longer issuing blanket defenses. Through all of this, Malik's nights were of nightmares. Some nights he dreamt he was pinned down again, suffocating, unable to scream. Other times, he relived the moment of stepping out of the car, replaying it again and again, imagining how he could have spoken or moved differently, anything to avoid the brutal outcome. A counselor at the community center noticed his distress and gently suggested therapy. At first, Malik resisted, feeling self-conscious, but after one particularly bad night, he called the recommended therapist and set up an appointment. Admitting he needed help felt like a moment of vulnerability and strength all at once. His first session was uncomfortable. He found it difficult to voice the depth of his fear, anger, and humiliation. But the therapist gently guided him, validating his feelings and reminding him that the blame belongs entirely to those who inflicted violence, not to him. Over time, he began to untangle the emotional knots. He realized how deeply the experience had shaken his sense of safety, how it had dredged up generational trauma that lingered beneath the surface of his everyday life. Meanwhile, the lawsuit crept forward through its legal channels. The city tried to offer a settlement, a hush-money figure that might have been tempting in another context, but Daniel and Malik refused, stating that they wanted an apology, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and clear disciplinary action against the officers. The city balked, attorneys volleying back and forth, but the momentum was on Malik's side. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. Malik, wearing a neat dress shirt and tie, walked into the courthouse with Daniel at his side. Tricia sat in the gallery, along with several community members who had come to show support. Malik felt his heart hammering as he took a seat. Officer Murphy and Officer Shaw were there too, in suits. He recognized them immediately, the same imposing figures now up for court. They didn't look at him, their gazes remained locked forward, but Malik felt a prickle of fear creep down his spine. Memories of the knee on his back, the bitter smell of their uniforms, the raw violence. Opening arguments began. Daniel spoke passionately about Malik's constitutional rights, the clear evidence on video, the seriousness of the violence inflicted. The city's defense tried to paint the officers as responding to a legitimate threat, citing heightened tension and reasonable suspicion. It made Malik's blood boil. The defense's narrative of him as a potential danger was a twisted distortion. But he swallowed his anger, reminding himself that the video told a different story. Afterwards, reporters crowded in the hallway, cameras flashing. Daniel gave a brief statement, reiterating their commitment to pursuing justice. Malik stood behind him, the bruise on his cheek still faintly visible, a constant reminder of the real stakes. The defense team hurried the officers away from the throng, looking irritated. Malik locked eyes with Officer Murphy for a split second. The man's glare contained a flicker of something, fear, maybe guilt, or perhaps just anger at being called out. Malik looked away, refusing to engage. In the weeks that followed, depositions were taken. Malik sat in a conference room with Daniel, calmly recounting every detail, signing affidavit after affidavit. Officer Shaw was deposed next, forced to explain on record why he used such force. He stumbled over his words, referencing some vague resistance. The video contradicted him, another step forward in the slow but relentless legal march. The city seemed more willing to negotiate, but Daniel pressed on. He wanted not just monetary compensation but mandatory reforms, including retraining for officers. A tipping point came when an anonymous teamster from inside the department leaked additional body camera footage that was never disclosed by the police. It showed a partial clip from a distance, capturing the crucial moment Shaw slammed Malik into the pavement. The audio caught Murphy saying, "We'll teach him," in a chilling tone. This new evidence was a bombshell. Public outcry exploded once more. Elected officials denounced the officers, urging the department to review its practices. Under mounting pressure, the city finally caved. They offered a substantial settlement, coupled with a promise of official reprimand for Murphy and Shaw. More importantly, they agreed to certain reform measures, improved de-escalation training, mandatory use of body cameras with penalties for failing to turn them on, and a civilian review board with more teeth. It was an unprecedented concession, one few had expected. Malik could hardly believe it, suspecting that even though these reforms were pledged, the follow-through might require continued vigilance. Still, it was a step forward. Malik, Daniel, and weighed the pros and cons. Going to trial could yield a bigger financial settlement or a more definitive ruling, but it also risked a protracted battle, with no guarantee of a better outcome. Ultimately, Malik wanted the reforms to be enacted as soon as possible, wanted to close this horrifying chapter and focus on healing. So he agreed to the settlement under the condition that the city's promised changes be implemented under court supervision. On the day the final agreement was signed, Malik felt a swirl of relief and lingering sorrow. No amount of money or policy reforms would erase the trauma, but at least something good had come from his suffering. He stood on the steps of the courthouse, holding a press conference with Daniel at his side. Scores of supporters cheered. He tried to speak through the lump in his throat, expressing gratitude to everyone who stood with him, especially Tricia, who had captured the video that saved his life and forced the truth into the open. In the months that followed, Malik settled into a tenuous peace. He used part of the settlement to pay for ongoing therapy, another portion to support the community center. He remained involved in advocacy, standing alongside and other activists to push for real accountability measures, ensuring the city upheld its commitments. The nightmares still came occasionally, but he found they lessened in intensity. He was slowly reclaiming his sense of safety, though it would never be quite what it was before. Late one evening, after a long day at the community center, Malik sat in his apartment's small balcony, gazing at the city lights. He sipped tea, listening to the muffled sounds of traffic. Occasionally, a police siren wailed in the distance, sending a chill through him, but he breathed slowly, reminding himself that he had faced that fear head-on and survived. He recalled the final conversation he had with Detective Hamilton, who had called to let him know that Internal Affairs officially recommended termination for Shaw. Murphy had resigned before disciplinary action could be taken. Part of Malik lamented that they might find work in another department or that the cycle could repeat, but for his own part, he had done everything he could. He had told the truth, fought in court, and demanded reforms. His phone buzzed. A text from "How are you doing, man?" hanging in there. Malik smiled slightly, typing back, "Yeah, I'm good, thanks for everything." He set the phone aside, closed his eyes, and let the city's nocturnal rhythm wash over him. His cheekbones still ached on rainy days, and the memory of that brutal night would always lurk in the corners of his mind. Yet, as he sat there, he realized he was no longer alone in that memory. He had a community, friends, allies, people who had stood up, witnessed, and fought for justice. The city still had a long way to go, but the ground had shifted, just a little away from silence and impunity. Overhead, stars flickered faintly between the glowing city lights, as if offering a silent benediction. Malik exhaled, feeling a measure of peace, buoyed by the knowledge that sometimes, when people unite to speak truth, even the hardest pavement can't keep them down forever. And he reminded himself, with quiet determination, that he would use his voice for those who had none, for those still too frightened to speak, and for the memory of every face smashed into the ground for no reason at all.